Hello everyone, my name is Paola and I welcome you to Mindalia livestream, where thousands of people around the world gather daily to watch the interviews and talks organized by MindaliaTV.com. In this occasion, we have Angel Rebo, who is a CEO consultant, TV host, international public speaker, and president of Wisdom for Kids. He'll be conducting an interview with Joseph Ranseth, titled Go Ahead, Start a Movement, and we'll learn how to create meaningful impact right where you are. Joseph Ranseth is a speaker, author, and transformationist. For over 15 years, Joseph had been helping people transform their lives and organizations using the same blueprint and principles that transformational leaders such as Gandhi and Dr. King used to change the world. But right before we start our interview, I would like to remind you all that if you would like to help the world through Mindalia, there are a few things that you can do. One of them is subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a like or leave a positive comment down below this video. Please note that with these actions, you are helping us reach even more people around the world who can benefit from the content of this channel. Also, to allow your interaction, please remember there is a chat on the side of our screen, which you can use to ask the questions to our guest, who will kindly answer to them by the end of his interview. Without further delay, please welcome Angel and Joseph. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you very much, Paola. And Joseph, it's a big pleasure for us to have you today. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. I've heard so much about this community, and I'm just so pleased to be here.
Thank you. Let's start with an easy question, because I love the term transformationist. But let's go first. I mean, can we really anybody create their own movement, Joseph?
Yeah, absolutely. This is it's an interesting story, right? Because people ask what I do, and I say I help people start movements, right? And it's not like I was in high school and I had a guidance counselor that said, "Hey, you show promise in starting movements. I think you should go take this degree in movement making." That wasn't really a clear path for me. For me, it was actually quite a journey of struggle and discovery. What I know is that there is an inner whisper within each one of us, that tells us that we're destined to do something beautiful and big in service to the planet, right? And when we align with that, and when we have the courage to act on it, express that voice, that becomes our movement, right? And so we may not all necessarily change the civil rights bill like Dr. King, or liberate India as Gandhi did. But each one of us, I am certain, are here to do something to further the consciousness of the planet, and to help, unfold and evolve what we're all here to do. And, we were talking a little bit offline. Thankfully, our journeys, no matter how challenging and difficult they become along the way, serve a purpose of unfolding and elevating human consciousness. The opportunity is, are we going to look and discover, how we can transform what we're doing in service to others?
And do you think it's a specific way to discover this life purpose, this mission that everybody has in life?
I think everyone has their unique path, right? We're all unique expressions of consciousness. But there are some principles that are common to all of us, and there are some markers, right? Some guideposts along the way that help us know that we're on the path. And for me, one of those key things was having a mentor, to help me discern the forest for the trees, so to speak. So yes, there are absolutely principles that apply to all of us commonly, but the journey is for each of us to find our own unique and distinct experience along the way.
You said that everybody has their own journey. Then everybody also has their own movement, or can potentially create their own movement.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe, getting clear on what your movement is first starts with getting clear on what a movement is, right? And so, often, like a lot of the work that I do is with businesses and entrepreneurs, that have a message that transforms consciousness. And often when people hear that I help people start movements, they think, oh, he's really great at marketing, right? And he's got a message, and he'll help people get lots and lots. And that is a part of a movement. But a movement is not necessarily about the numbers, right? And in the case of Gandhi and Dr. King, like absolutely, there were massive numbers involved in those movements. We can dive into those a little bit deeper later, if it makes sense. But it's more about the impact, right? A movement is about the impact and about transformation. And a lot of times we talk about transformation and change, and we use those terms interchangeably as if they mean the same thing. And I don't believe that that's the case. I believe that our movement is something that creates a transformation in people, and we all have this unique life path. We all have gifts and strengths that are unique to us. We all have experiences. We all have failures, shortcomings, adversities, challenges. Often what we're tempted to do is to put those into two different buckets, right? These are all the good things over here, and these are all the bad things over here. And our movement really, when we're able to arrive at a place where we can transcend that. We can transcend the good and bad and the right and wrong and see it all in a context of how does this serve transformation, on a personal or a global scale.
Is there, when I think about creating a movement, obviously it comes to my mind, maybe it's a lot of work, it's a lot of many different things, maybe not only marketing, but being clear on a lot of many different things. So what would you say is the number one step that anybody watching us today, they could do by themselves to start getting excited about creating a movement?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. The first and most important thing, I believe, is adopting the belief that everything that's happening to you in your life is serving the greater purpose, right? So as we were saying before, that temptation to put things into the good or the bad, and sometimes we tend to think, oh, here's what I'm doing.
We can't hear you. Excuse me. I apologize to our audience. For some reason, we've lost the image for a while, and then the sound. We're trying to fix that now. I can hear you now.
Yeah?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, there we go.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Anyway, carry on, please. Thank you. Thank you. My apologies to everybody. Thank you.
So we have this temptation to put things into good and bad, right? This is what I'm up to, and then this setback has happened, and that's in the way of me doing this great work that I want to do. And whether that's a challenge with illness or financial setbacks or interpersonal challenges, when we zoom out from a broader perspective, we see that is actually not in the way of how we're going to serve the planet, but is the way that we're going to serve the planet. So that would be the most important thing. For me, my story was, I started off many years ago, in internet marketing back in the 90s, right? So a long time ago, back when I was 12 years old, I was working in internet marketing, and it was really neat to be, part of this. It was new, the technology, and it was very exciting. And I had this conflict on the inside, right? Because I was doing this and I was good at that, and there was validation at that, and I was successful. But my heart was really pulled somewhere else, that I wanted to serve people, right? I wanted to help elevate the consciousness of the planet. And I felt like, here's what I do for money, and then when I get some free time, this is what I do. And then I involve myself here, and then when I run out of money, then I go back and I do this. It was this ping pong back and forth, both in physical reality, but also mentally, right? It was very, very exhausting. And it wasn't until one of my earliest mentors, who was Dr. Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He gave me some advice that completely transformed my career as well as my life. He said, if you want to be successful, right? And he was talking about a success that was so much richer than just material success. If you want to be successful, you need to learn how to integrate the spiritual with the secular. And for me, I didn't fully understand the implication of what he was saying at the time, but I knew that this ping pong match that I was playing didn't have to happen, that there was a possibility that what I had learned as a marketer on one hand, and then what I had learned as a minister, I had been an ordained minister for a number of years, actually had the potential to be married together into something beautiful. And that was when I started diving into the study of what I now call the master marketers, right? Gandhi, Dr. King, Jesus, Buddha, the people that had the same skill set that modern day marketers have, right? Because a lot of times we look at marketing as just promotion, right? How do you run a Facebook ad? How do you do this or that? But really good marketers have a lot more in common with therapists and counselors because they know how the human mind works. They know what drives people and how they make decisions. And, in marketing, unfortunately, a lot of it is knowing how that happens so that we can manipulate it, right? I know what colors to use, what words to use, et cetera, to stir the emotions to make you want to buy whatever kind of widget that I'm selling. But when you look at the master marketers like Gandhi, Dr. King, et cetera, they had a very similar knowledge. But instead of using that to engineer a transaction, they used it to engineer a transformation, right? And I would define, in simple terms, transformation is a change in the way that people see themselves, other people, or the world around them. And when you give people a new lens, that change in behavior becomes automatic. By studying that, that was where I was able to, develop and discern this blueprint of how they did it that each of us, can follow. But the heart of it really was knowing the distinction between transactions and transformation, or just, change, getting people to do things, but also helping elevate consciousness, helping them change from the inside out.
You mentioned Stephen Covey being one of your mentors. Have you got any other mentors that you would like to talk about?
Gosh, I have had so many mentors. I feel like if I were to name one in particular, I would feel bad for not naming the others. But I will say this, that I have found that having mentors, is not a sign of weakness. Often, we look at it through this lens of, I don't know something, I'm admitting I don't know it, but having mentors is really a beautiful partnership with people who have walked or are walking the same path. And so for me, I have mentors and coaches in multiple areas of my life, physically, in business, spiritually. That doesn't necessarily have to be like hiring a coach or paying money to someone or joining a specific organization. But I think it's critical that we all get very clear on where do we want to go, right? What do we want to do? And who has already been there, right? Or who's even a few steps ahead of us that would be willing to help us along the way so that we can be a little more efficient, a little more effective in the journey make things better for ourselves so that we can more quickly get to a place that we're able to have a greater impact on other people.
And do you think that it's really relevant and necessary for people that are willing to create a movement of any kind to be looking for those mentors that maybe are a little bit ahead of them in the game?
Yeah, I find this such an interesting discussion because mentors are really important. And there's also like another truth that exists at the same time, that the answers are all within. I love the teaching of Lao Tzu when he said that the words of truth are always in paradox, right? Sometimes we get this idea that because one thing is true, that necessarily means the opposite is not true. The deepest level of truth is always in paradox. So I think your question is a beautiful example that it's important that we have mentors. It's important that we connect with people, and be in community and be in relationship. And it's also really important to remember that the real answers come from within. And to be able to hold the space for both of those truths at the same time without negating the other. Because I've seen it often where people say, you know what, I don't need a mentor because I know that all the answers are within. And just because the answers are within, it doesn't mean that we can't benefit from mentors as well. But just because mentors are valuable doesn't mean we should dismiss the inner wisdom that each of us have access to.
You've mentioned a few times different subjects related to spirituality. Would you mind sharing with the audience of Mindalia TV how your journey to spirituality has been so far?
Yeah. How much time do we have, right?
Up to you.
Yeah, it's been 39 years in the making. The context is what I have learned through my spiritual path. It is precisely that, is that there's this beautiful truth that of the power of being in relationship and community, and that the answers are within. And so for me, as a young child, I grew up, my mother was very religious, and I went to church, and at a young age, I started reading the scriptures on my own. And as I started, reading the scriptures and studying, my experience was I found things that were different in the church that I was going to than from the scriptures that I was reading, and they didn't match. And so I went on this personal quest to have a deeper understanding of the scriptures, was looking for organizations that embodied that. And it went through this path. As I mentioned, I was an ordained minister for a number of years, and I think the best way to explain my journey of being very religious and now being in a place that I'm not so religious, at the risk of oversimplifying it, to me is in the beautiful story of the Garden of Eden, right? With Adam and Eve are in the garden. They walk and talk with God, and then they eat the fruit, and then they're banished from God, right? And so as a minister, we would talk about this and teach this and classes and all that. And there are two common mistakes that people make when they talk about this story. One is that they ate an apple, right, from the tree of good and evil. And the truth is, it wasn't an apple; it just was a fruit, right? We don't know what kind of fruit. But the other is, it wasn't from the tree of good and evil; it was from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And when you zoom out a little bit, prior to them eating the fruit, they were connected with God. They were in the presence of God, and they were one. And then as they ate the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, there was now this separation between good and evil. Previously, there was only unity. And afterward, there was now good and evil. And then when you look at all of the, throughout the Old Testament, as well as the New Testament, the rituals, the teachings, they all pointed to how do we find reconciliation to bring back to unity. And often the thing that keeps us away from the divine is this idea that there is a good and an evil, right? That there's a right and a wrong, a good and a bad, this separation. And, as we go on our journey, I like to think that religion, it does a beautiful job of helping us see the guideposts, right? Of this is good for you, this is not so good for you, right? And that's a gift, right? To help us get a sense of what will help us in our personal journey. And at the same time, everything, right? The sunshine always casts a shadow, right? And every shadow comes from a ray of sunshine, right? This paradox. And when we can hold space for the paradox, that sometimes the things that help us, also there's an opportunity to see that they can hinder us. And so, for me, the journey of saying thank you for this beautiful scaffolding, as it was, the guidepost to keep me on, and I'm going to go within and find those answers within. And so, so much of what I learned on my personal spiritual journey ties into what I do in my career work, because ultimately transformation is helping people to see where there is a this or a that. When you can raise consciousness, you can now see a whole. So for example, on a quarter, right, we can see a heads or we can see a tails. And some people, if I held it up in front of the camera, right? You might argue that you see heads, and I might argue that no, it's a tail, right? And we think that it's one or the other. But if we could both zoom out, we could agree that it's heads and tails, and it's actually just a quarter. And so often the things that we fight about in terms of like religion and politics, left and right, and this or that, conservative and liberal, right, are just opposite sides of the same coin. And those of us who are on this journey of trying to create movements, and those of us who are trying to elevate consciousness, you know, in essence, I believe, are always just trying to raise, you know, the perspective on things, so that we can now see a whole where we used to see division.
And do you help also, you help a lot of people to create movements, so do you also help them to understand the concept of elevating consciousness? Because as you said, you know, religion helps a lot, but maybe they don't have all the answers. Can they get these answers from you?
Not from me, certainly not. You know, I like to think that I've got a blueprint, you know, and I can teach the principles. But principles are beautiful because they apply to everyone universally. And then the value is when we apply those principles in our own lives, then we find the fruit. So I have a lot more questions than I do have answers for anyone. But I believe, you know, a skilled coach is just good at helping people to ask their own questions so they can find their own answers. You know, so much of it for me comes back to getting clear on why we do what we do, right? When Dr. Covey told me about you need to integrate the spiritual with the secular, you know, he didn't say the religious with the secular. Even though those who know Dr. Covey, he was a very religious man, right? You know, he was a devout religious man, but he said spiritual. And for me, I think of the parable of the stonecutters, right? An old man is journeying, you know, in a foreign land, and he sees a stone quarry, right? And he sees, you know, 3 men working in the quarry, and he asks each of those 3 men the same question: what are you doing, right? And the first one working away is grumbling. He doesn't even look up. He just says, I'm cutting stone and I'm getting calluses on my hands. Okay? Interesting. The second, you know, the old man asks the same question: what are you doing? And that man stops for a moment and he looks the old traveler right in the eye, and he says, I'm earning an honest day's wage to support my family that I love. And then to the third, he asks the exact same question: what are you doing? Right? And that man stops, puts his tools down, and lifts his gaze high toward the sky and says, I am building a cathedral to glorify the Most High. Right? And so what we do matters, but not near as much as why we do it. And I believe that, you know, elevating consciousness, right, is so much about seeing the why behind what we're doing. Because, you know, as Confucius said, right, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, right? After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, right? We do the same things. But when we can inject a little bit more clarity of the purpose of why we're doing it, right? And you can just imagine, like, they were all cutting stone. And one guy, he was getting calluses. Yeah, so were the other 2. But he was letting that bring him down and get him grumpy. But you can bet that that third person not only was getting a lot more fulfillment out of what he was doing, and he was happy, right? He was joyful, but you can bet that he was having a lot more of those magical experiences, right? Those moments that we've all had when, you know, we pull up to the store and then the parking spot is ready right there in front. Or, you know, like just those, like, you know, funny little things, or sometimes very profound experiences that when we're in alignment, right, with the highest expression of our soul, that magic seems to happen. So much of, you know, to answer your question, I think is like, can we get tuned in to what the expression is of our nature, right, of our soul? That's where we're going to find the answers, right? And no one can give us that. You know, people can help us, you know, in that inquiry, but that's a journey for each of us to find on our own. And I believe that the seeds, if we're curious about what that is, so much of that can be found in the adversity and the hardships and the heartache that we find, because that's where the real gems are, I believe.
I would like to ask a little bit more about your community, the people that you help every day to create their movements, because that must be such an amazingly rewarding thing to do. So what do you think that all those different people that come to you, that you help create their movements, what do you think that they have in common?
You know, there are a couple of obvious things. First and foremost is that as much as they want to, grow a business and make a living and make money, their primary motivation is meaning and impact. That it's not just about what they can get, but it's about what they can give. So first and foremost, it would be that. The other is just a desire to understand the experiences that they're facing personally, and how to transform those into something more profound. I think that we all, or I know that we all want to elevate human consciousness. We might not use those words, but that is why we're here. Every one of us. That's why we grow. That's why we improve. That's why we experience the things that we do. That's why we get so discouraged and so frustrated when things don't turn out the way that we want, because we see very clearly, where we want to go in this vision. And if it didn't matter, we wouldn't feel it, right? So that, first and foremost, getting clarity on, I know there's something I'm here to do, even if I don't know what it is. That pull is something that I believe in one way or another we all have. And sometimes life can diminish that flame, but it's there. And sometimes all we need is a spark from someone else to help fan it into a flame. But that's why we're here. And it's those who've got a hint of it, that's one of the other things that is in common within those in my community.
You mentioned that you had a blueprint. So that means that the process of creating a movement is something like extremely well organized. Mm-hmm. Like it has different stages. You are able to actually see the impact. You're able to measure. How does that work?
Yeah, at a very simple level, every movement has three things, right? One is a big idea, right? And when I say big idea, I'm not talking about an invention or like cold fusion, like, whoa, Marty, I've got it. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a big idea in that it's bigger than ourselves. It's bigger than any one individual, right? A big idea is something that has the power to bring people together where they otherwise might have been divided, right? A big idea is always an expression of universal truths, right, and principles that benefit everybody equally, even if they don't adopt it, right? So there are a lot of movements, so to speak, that are not really movements. Like they catch on, their ideas, lots of people, join a club or buy this thing, but you only benefit if you're on the inside, right? But a true movement is something that benefits the quality of life for everybody, not just those who adopt it. So a big idea, first and foremost. The second thing is a clear message, right? I used to teach at the university here in Canada, where I live, and I would put up a picture, put up a slide, and it was a picture of Dr. King, right? And even without putting the slide up now, I would ask, what is he saying? And almost everybody knows the answer, right? I have a dream, right? I've yet to meet anyone who knows all the words to that 16-minute and 26-second speech, but everybody knows I have a dream. They know the message of it, and that the essence of it was that he dreamed of a future where his children would be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin, right? He saw a future where we all could get along and we wouldn't judge each other on something as superficial as our skin. And because he was able to articulate the big idea in such a clear way, people were able to get it. And because of that, the third thing that every movement needs are evangelists, right? An army of advocates for the cause, right? Coming back to my days as a minister, right? We draw on the example of Jesus, right? He came and he brought truth and he brought this message and all of these things, but he didn't do it by himself. The first thing he did was he called others who would go and take it out to other people. And so in order for a movement to happen, you see that this is no longer, the message isn't about my product is so much better than your product, because you can't just get an army of advocates to start sharing that message, because that only benefits the one person, you know. But in order to have evangelists that really adopt that big idea as their own without losing their own identity, it has to be founded on something eternal, right? It has to be founded on an expression in one way or another of the universal truth that we are all one, that we're all connected. And you could see that, like, all of the people, right, 300,000 people came out to hear Dr. King give that speech. They were able to do it because they were showing up in their highest expression of who they were, not just in support of someone else. So at a very simple level, those are the three things that every movement needs. And you know, it's funny because it's a little more complicated than that, right? There's more to it, but that's the short version. But I remember years ago, I was telling this to my assistant, right? I had been working with her, and I explained this, and I said, but you know, there's actually another thing, right? It doesn't, like, there's a fourth thing, but it actually kind of comes first. And what it really is like asking the question, what made Gandhi Gandhi, right? What made Dr. King Dr. King? Because there were other people, you know, that were doing similar things, but there was something about these people, this personal power that they had, that gave this blueprint, right? The power that it did. And she was like, oh, okay. And a few days later, she asked me, she said, I want to hear more about this element zero. And I was like, element zero? What are you talking about? And she said, well, you know, it's the fourth element, but it comes first. So element zero. And I'm like, as someone who studied so much branding and marketing, I was like, that doesn't make sense. But there was something to it that really just, like, touched my heart. And I'm like, there's something here. And within 24 hours of her asking that, I was doing some research, and I found this story that when Gandhi went to Britain, right, to negotiate with the monarchy for the release of India, there was a journalist that asked him, what is your secret, right? How does this 90-pound, you know, foreigner in homemade clothes, you know, in sandals and a walking stick bring the largest empire on the planet to its knees, essentially? And his answer was 6 words. I strive to make myself zero, right? The answer, like, to the question of where, like, what his secret was, what the source of all his power, this essence that he was striving to make himself zero. Or in other words, like, he was so driven by the welfare of others that it wasn't about what he could get. He was striving, as he said, to remove himself from the equation. That it wasn't about him, you know, in any way whatsoever. It was solely about the welfare of those he served. So much so that, you know, he was willing to live his life for the cause and endure all that he did. He was even willing to give his life for the cause, right? And we see that for Dr. King. And there's something very powerful in each of us finding that, what are we willing to not only live, but give our lives for? And that I believe unlocks, you know, a supernatural power for each of us, because we know that it's bigger than ourselves. We know that it doesn't matter whether we come or go, right? Whether we stay or leave. That if we're doing it in service to a higher cause, that we'll be willing to do whatever it takes. And when we get that conviction for why we are alive, like, we become unstoppable.
That's so fascinating. That zero element, is that something that can be taught? Can you teach that to your movement creators? Can that be learned? Joseph, yeah. What do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, again, you know, not to make this Sunday school, but I think of, you know, Jesus when he was teaching, and he said, greater love, you know, has no man than this, you know, that he would lay down his life for his friends, right? And this attitude, right, which is all it was. When you think back to the stonecutters, right, it was just the purpose of what was driving. And so, you know, the most powerful exercise I have found for cultivating this element zero is really just asking the question. So I'll often give a homework assignment for people that are getting started. And it is to ask yourself the question in your mind 1,000 times in a day, right? What can I do to serve, right? How can I best serve? How can I best serve? And in this moment, how can I best serve? How can I best serve? And when we do that, when that starts to become our lens of how can I serve, right? How can I have the greatest benefit to others? How can I give? That we cultivate this power. And all of a sudden, the things that generally hold us back, right? And you think of all of personal development. Typically, it's about letting go of our limitations, right? It's about like, what are the limiting beliefs that we have, and what are the stories that we're telling ourselves that hold us back? Well, when you cultivate this element zero, so to speak, all of those like just are removed from the equation. Because when I'm asking, how can I best serve? You know what I'm not asking? I'm not asking, how can I look good? How can I save face? How can I, whatever, you know? And so we're willing to be vulnerable. We're willing to be authentic. We're willing to tell the truth, even if it hurts. We're willing to do all of those things because that's how we best serve. And so we can complicate it. We can do lots of different things, you know, or we can just ask the question, like, how can I be selfless in service to others? And a lot of that stuff happens automatically. Wow.
What's coming to my mind, you know, recently we've had very many different news or on the news about, you know, kids in the school system, different school systems. And unfortunately, they don't have that strong self-esteem, and unfortunately, they don't value their lives, and they surrender, or they're just suffering. I believe that, you know, we all have some sort of responsibility or mission to help the ones that will not be able to watch this video because they are still too young, or maybe they are on another kind of platform. So I would like to ask you a very humble question, like, how can we do it better with our kids and with our youth?
That is a really powerful question. Thank you for asking that. And before I answer it, I want to say, I think that in asking these types of questions, it's important to first notice that sometimes the types of answers that we have will fall into two categories, right? And this is where we start to see politics happen, right? And so when you look at the way politics would approach a lot of problems, right? A lot of social problems, we would have on one hand, you know, a group of people that would say, it's up to the individual, right? It's their choice. It's within their power. They need to make better choices. They need to whatever. And then the other hand would say, like, we as society need to take care of them. We need more social programs. We need this. We need that. And again, this is one of those places where we often will make it a this or a that when it doesn't need to be, because the answer is not or. The answer is an and, right? That there, especially if you look at the history of politics, right? When you look back to, for example, you know, human evolution, right? You know, we used to be hunter-gatherers, right? And as tribes, we would go around and we would hunt the buffalo, right? And as a tribe, we'd go and hunt the buffalo, and there may be 20 or 40 people on the buffalo hunt, but one person was the one that threw the spear that killed the buffalo. But then it goes back to the village and everyone shares the buffalo, right? And then, you know, over time, as things evolved, we got to the agricultural revolution, which now everyone has their own plot of land, everyone plants their own seed, and in the fall, they all reap what they sow, right? And so now it's the individual, and that is essentially, both of these want what is fair. One looks at it through the lens of how we're all connected. One looks at it through the lens of how we're all unique. And those are not at odds with each other. We are all a part of each other, and we are all unique expressions. So, you know, before answering your question, I think it's important we all avoid the temptation to fall into a this or that and see that the answer is both. That there are things that we can do as a community to help that, and then there are things that individuals can do. So I think that, yes, while we should be looking at, you know, what can we do as a community or social programs, maybe government policy, etc., it's also what can we do to cultivate personal responsibility and accountability, and have those two cooperate. So specifically, to answer your question, I think so much of it comes down to relationship, right? That until we see it, right? I have a really good friend. Her name is Anne-Marie Schrouder, and she's a consultant that works in diversity and inclusion. And she once said something that touched me so powerfully. She said, "You can't be yourself until you can see yourself." And I think it's so important that each of us on this path to recognizing our potential, we need to be able to see it, right? And so when you talk about youth at risk, what's important is for them to see a possibility that their life could be better. And so often, we get trapped into hopeless situations, whether it's that or in other cases, because we don't believe a possibility exists that's better. But the more that we can be in connection, in a relationship with other people who can show us a new possibility, the more that our own mind will start to believe that it's true. This is why I love so much the Big Brothers and Big Sisters program. I've been an active mentor with Big Brothers I've been matched with my little brother now for 6 years. And to me, it is one of the most rewarding things because I don't always see the impact that I'm having. But just showing up week after week, knowing that I'm providing a different frame of reference, right? A different reference point to show what is possible is a valuable thing, right? And so I think a lot of kids don't believe that they can grow up to be a doctor because they've never seen a doctor that has their same color of skin, or they've never seen someone from their neighborhood, become a doctor. And the more that we can start to show those things, the more those possibilities will exist. So I believe relationships. So as individuals, what can we do? Let's be in a relationship with people that may be not as fortunate as us and start to provide new reference points.
And is it easier or more difficult when we're talking about developing relationships within your own family?
To me, this is where it comes down to soulmates, right? I think when we talk about soulmates, we tend to think of, the soulmate is the person that I fall in love at first sight with, and they make me so happy and they lift my soul, and that may be true, but I'm far more inclined to believe that our soulmates are the people that show up in our lives to help us come to the full expression of our soul's potential. And what I have learned, just like a muscle, right? You don't reach your muscle's full potential by taking the easy way. It happens through the painful path, right? It happens through the tearing and the breaking down, and then the rebuilding. And so in our family relationships, I believe we have our soulmates because when we are closest to people, that's when we let down our guard. We let the worst parts of ourselves come out, right? We feel comfortable. We would never lose our temper, at our boss or someone that we respect, but we would do it to our kids or to our spouses. And when we start to take a look, an honest look at the worst parts of ourselves, we can start to see, here's an opportunity for me to grow. Here's an opportunity for me to become, more aligned with us. And this is why, those close relationships sometimes get so painful, because we don't want to tell the truth. We don't want to tell the truth that I lost my temper and it makes me feel insecure and weak and I feel like a coward because I did it. So instead of telling that truth, we just say, well, they made me do it. Or, if they weren't such a jerk, or if they didn't such and such, then I wouldn't do that. Therefore, they're the wrong person. And I think the people that anger us, or the people that disappoint us, the people that stir any sort of emotion within us, positive or negative, are there to teach us a lesson, right? If it stirs an emotion, it carries a lesson.
And that can also happen to a movement, right? I guess you might be obviously helping a lot of people to create movements, and maybe they are creating a counter movement in society, or they're perceiving or creating a lot of resistance, right? Do you talk also about that on when you help people create their movements?
Yeah, well, it's such an important point. As you talk about, you look at some movements, for example, which are anything but. Right. The most obvious example is Adolf Hitler. Right. He got a lot of people following his idea and his message and started passing it along. But that whole thing, was based on. It wasn't based on a big idea. Right. It was based on the opposite of that. Because the essence of his idea was creating more separation, right? If you adopted his idea, it benefited you only if you were on the inside, and it harmed the people who were marginalized. And it was an expression of the truth that we're all one, right? So that's the most extreme example. But I think even within the consciousness realm, right? Even within personal transformation and spiritual development, what we often do is we see the shadow, right? Or maybe we don't see the shadow, but like this notion that every ray of light casts a shadow. But what's also true is that every shadow comes from a ray of light. And so, for example, often people will come to me and they'll say, I'm really passionate about this topic, right? And why they're passionate about that topic generally stems from some catalyzing experience, right? I had a challenge, an adversity, some sort of childhood trauma maybe, that got me really excited about this. And to me, the mark of a movement is when we can transcend beyond the this or that, right? So often when people get started on this path of growth or of teaching, they're moving away from something and they're finding a truth. And then when they come to the place of raising consciousness, right, it's where they actually can hold the space for two truths, right, that may at another level seem to contradict another. So yeah, I believe it's very common that we'll start espousing ideas that we think are good and that are in service to another. And I think this is exactly what happens in politics, right? Personal accountability and responsibility, and then social community responsibility are two very powerful truths. But if taken to their extreme and without the balance of the other, both become very destructive. Because if we look at, if we had a neighbor who was struggling and they fell and broke their hip, and they needed, us to call the police or call the ambulance, but we said, no, personal responsibility, they need to pick up the phone and call the ambulance themselves, it's not gonna solve anything, right? But at the same time, if as a parent, we see a child struggling, and we just, we have our, 45-year-old son living in the basement, we, wash their clothes and do their dishes and their laundry and never help them develop personal responsibility, we're also doing a huge disservice, right? So I think that happens all the time, that we latch on to one idea and we fail to see the balance and the broader perspective, even within some very well-intentioned, work within the consciousness and development industries.
Awesome, beautiful. Well, where I would definitely love to please share with to have you share with us with our audience. Where can Mindalia TV's viewers find you? How can we find you?
Yeah, come find me, on my website, josephranseth.com. I'm on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. It's just Joseph Ranseth, Ranseth. If people come to my website, they can download a copy of that blueprint to learn more about how they can create transformation, and how to transfer, instead of marketing, move into actually movements. So there's a free copy of that if people want to find it on the website, but it's just josephranseth.com. And if anyone's listening, if anything, resonated with you, or if anyone has any questions, please reach out to me by social media, Facebook or Twitter. Twitter's my favorite. I love Twitter. And I'd love to chat. I'd love to engage.
Beautiful. Awesome. So let's go to the questions from the audience. Joseph, let me start here. Wonderful. So number one, first question, how do we convince ourselves that everything happens for a reason?
That's a great question. I would say that you don't have to convince yourself that everything happens for a reason, because I don't believe that everything happens for a reason. I believe that everything happens, period. Then the opportunity is for us to discover the reason. And often the reason is not so much something that we discover, so much as it is deciding. So look at everything that happens in your life, right? And say, you know what, this happened. And instead of asking the question why, right? And why can be an endless loop, right? We can just go around and around in circles in why, because why is a hypothetical, right? Like we can't necessarily find a concrete answer unless it's like, why did my car break down or whatever. But when you're looking at things that are of this nature, asking why did this happen may not ever give us a fruitful answer. A more appropriate question would be, how can I use what happened in service to others, right? So no matter what happened, if we shift our inquiry from why did this happen, right? Or what is the reason for this happening to, okay, this happened. How am I going to deal with it? How am I now going to use this to learn something about myself? And how am I going to take that lesson and use it in service to others? Is always going to be a more fruitful inquiry than, what is the reason for this happening, or why did this happen? So don't worry about, convincing yourself that things happen for a reason. Just convince yourself that things happen and you can't do anything about the past. And then ask yourself, how can I use this in service to others?
Wonderful. Next question. How would you say you integrate your spiritual and secular aspects in your life?
So to me, the essence of this comes back to the parable of the stone cutters, right? Spiritual, by definition, is being driven by a purpose, right, bigger than ourselves. So seeing connected to something bigger. So for me, it's really about this inquiry of, how do I make what I'm doing a meditation, right? How do I take this everyday thing that I'm doing, whether it's doing the dishes or the laundry or my job, how do I use those things in service to other people, right? So so many teachers teach this essence, right? Tony Robbins is super famous for this, and others. But the quality of life, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions, right? So when you're looking at integrating spiritual into everyday life, this is a matter of, what are the questions that I'm asking? So for me, some of the questions are, what is this teaching me about myself? Particularly when bad things happen, right? And I use the term bad loosely, right? What is this teaching me about myself? And then another is, how can I use this in service to other people? Those two questions, I think, are just a beautiful balance of what we talked about, of the personal accountability as well as social responsibility and contribution to other people.
Beautiful. Next question. What can you say about your experience as a minister? What have you learned that helps you today?
Yeah. I certainly think that being able to sit down and talk with so many people, has been a tremendous gift that has helped me an awful lot. And I think as well, having the opportunity to stand and to speak so often, right, and to teach. As someone who speaks often, right, I host my own events, a professional speaker. A lot of times people will ask me, like, how do you get so good at speaking, right? Like, what are the tips? And there are a lot of people that are experts on this, and they can teach like how to become a great speaker. But for me, I found that there are two things, right? First and foremost is mastery of content, right? So as a minister, right, there are different approaches, but for me, I took the words, that Jesus said at face value when he said, take no thought, for what you shall say, right? For it will be delivered to you in that moment. But he said, treasure up in you the words of life. And this isn't about like, religious, right? It's, what are the words that are important to you, right? How can you fill your mind and let your mind marinate on the goodness that you want to bring forth into the world? So there's all sorts of books that we can, read. There's meditations we can do, mantras we can do, and all of that. But to fill your mind and to master the content so that when it's needed, it can come forth, right? Anyone, if they were asked to be like, tell me about your childhood, they could talk for hours and hours without any difficulty. But we get nervous, to talk about things that we don't have a level of mastery over. The second part of that is really just a desire to serve, right? And so a lot of people will teach, well, you got to stand this way and use your hands like this, and you got to pause and you got to look and all of that. And all of those are just mechanics that I believe become irrelevant when before we start to speak, we close our eyes and we say a prayer saying, let this be used in service to the people that hear. And when we come from that space about giving, it's like, we don't care if we look good. We don't, and we just get connected to our spiritual nature, and things start to flow from us instead of, oh, what was I supposed to say next? Oh, I don't remember. I lost my script. Like all of that just goes out the window. Right?
Wow. Powerful. Thank you. Thank you. Next question. Do you agree with the thought that the earth has duality? What is your view on duality? God, good and bad, right and wrong?
Yeah, it certainly does, right? But it's mostly of our own creation. We see this and that. And again, when you look at like consciousness is a gradient, right? When you look at, for example, light and dark, right? We tend to look at, there's light and dark and these are opposites, right? But when you really look at it, light and dark are not opposites, right? We define them as opposites, but really what they are is a gradation, right? It's a difference of degree, because dark is the absence of light. And then as you slowly start to introduce more light, it becomes brighter and brighter and brighter. So it's not an opposite, it's a difference of degree. It's the same with truth and falsehood, right? We look at and say it's this or that, right? When actually it's a difference of degree, right? Good and bad is really just the absence of love and then the degree of the presence of love. So yes, there is duality, and we use it more as a functional tool to help us identify things, right? As human beings, we have a high need for control, right? We want to understand the world around us, so we like to put things into little boxes here and there, and we start to understand this serves me, this doesn't serve me, that's a snake, like stay away from that. These are helpful people, stay with them. And like so much of what we do is driven by a brain that is hundreds of thousands and of years old. And we haven't quite caught up to things. So we use this duality as a way of explaining things and categorizing. But when we really, really look at it, it's more a difference of degree. How connected are we to truth? How connected are we to love? How connected are we to spirit? And everything is a matter of degrees. So I would say, yes, duality is true, but embrace it only to the degree that it serves you, and start to develop your discernment where you can start to see the difference in degree.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question. Why do you consider yourself a transformationist?
Well, the simple reason is I like the word. I made it up, so I used it. But the background on the word transformationist is about 500 years ago, as scientists, as the science revolution was happening, and people were really starting to be in the scientific inquiry and to understand how the world worked. There was one scientist, who developed this theory that evolution, the theory was called Lamarckian transformation, and essentially what it said is that species evolved, and things evolved because of a higher nature. Right? There was a higher impetus. There was something of the divine that was saying you need to evolve and change. And while that was dismissed as a scientific theory, as Darwin's theory of evolution and natural selection and retention, variation, all of that came about. I believe that this essence of transformation does a really good job of describing the human experience, right? I'm not going to say it's a scientific thing, but I believe that there is a whisper within each of us that is pulling us to do something, to do something big, to do something profound in this world in service to others. And it's that whisper, that drive to evolve and to grow, that I have centered, my work around. And I'm not going to claim to be an expert or a guru and have all of the answers or this or that. But I chose that, that term of transformationist, because that is the work that I do, is helping people tune into that inner whisper, to give voice to it, and use it in expression, use the expression of it in service to others through the elevation of human consciousness. And most often, my clients are doing it through business, right? How do we elevate human consciousness, through business?
Excellent. Thank you. Next question. What would you say is the purpose of the millions of lives of people who have regular jobs and common lives?
Wow, that's a beautiful question. Whoever asked that, thank you. That's a beautiful question. I believe unequivocally every one of us are here to evolve human consciousness. And when you look back throughout history, right, often like we get caught up in the news, right, and we see all of the things that are happening and all of the violence and the disasters, and we think that things are getting an awful lot worse in the world. But when you look at it historically, the world is getting a lot better, right? The violence, the number of deaths, is like is plummeting. It's going so much further down because as humans, we're evolving, right? We're learning that it's better not to smash people over the heads with rocks, right? We're learning that it's better to cooperate and to get along. And every one of us play a part in that work of evolving human consciousness, no matter what we're doing, right? Dr. King talked about, even if you are a street sweeper, right? Your job is to become the best street sweeper that you can and to bring some joy into it. And so the work that we do, every one of us, right, is part of the evolving of human consciousness, right? Just like the stonecutter, how much can we put in that desire to serve others and to glorify something bigger than ourselves, right, through whatever we're doing. So, whoever asked, wherever you are, whatever you are doing is a part of the unfolding of human consciousness. Bring a lot of love to it, right, and try and inspire other people to see that love so that they can pass it on.
Excellent, thank you. Next question, how can I create meaningful impact in my day-to-day life without having to pursue a big goal or starting a movement?
Beautiful. Well, I mean, the first off is I would say, look at a movement as a moment, right? Instead of an outcome, right? We look at Gandhi and Dr. King and we think they did a movement because they changed the lives of millions of people. But instead, look at a movement as a moment. And what can you do in a moment? Transformation. So in a moment, checking out at the grocery store, can you stop and look the cashier in the eye and say, thank you. I really appreciate what you're doing. And I just want you to know that I don't really know who you are, but I love you. Thank you for helping me. This has made my day. To take that opportunity, to take that moment is a movement, because you're moving something. You're shifting from the I'm cutting, stone and I'm getting callous to, hey, we're all connected. We're all a part of something bigger. And I want you to know that I see you. Right? Because as human beings, we all want to be seen, we all want to be heard, we all want to be accepted, and we all want to know that we're good enough. So can you have an impact in the day-to-day? Absolutely. Can you help someone to know that, that you see them, that you hear them, that you accept them and you love them for who they are?
Wow, powerful. Thank you. Next question. How do you believe we can empower ourselves and be firm on the belief that we can change our lives for the better?
Can you ask that one again?
Yes. How do you believe that we can empower ourselves and be firm on the belief that we can change our lives for the better?
Yeah. I think that comes back to, the earlier question of, life happens. And sometimes it's messy. And no matter what happens, can we stop and resist the temptation to get into that question of like, why is this happening to me? And start to ask a more empowering question. I remember many years ago, I was sick, right? I was diagnosed with something, and I was not doing well, and I was really struggling with like, why is this happening to me? Like I'm only trying to do good. Why am I sick? This is getting in the way of me trying to serve other people. And I had a mentor at the time, and he said, well, have you prayed and asked why that's happening to you? And I said, I'm asking all the time. Why is this happening to me? Why is this? And he's like, yeah, but are you expecting an answer? And I realized that I had been asking the question, but really I wasn't expecting an answer. I was just whining. I was just complaining, like, why is this happening to me? Oh, here we go again. But by asking that question and saying, why is this happening to me? And to start to listen for an answer, a lot more empowering answers come. So wherever you are in life, like, take a moment to stop and to breathe and to just take it in and say, like, why is this happening to me? Right? Or a more empowering way, like what good can come of this? Not can any good come of this, but what good can come of this? Right? And as we start to ask questions, our brain automatically looks for the answers, right? The same thing if I say, what color was the door of your house when you were a kid? Immediately your brain starts searching for, well, what color was my door when I was a kid, right? And it's programmed, question in, answer out. So be very careful of the questions that we put in and choose some really empowering ones. How can I use this to understand my true nature? How can this make me better? How can I serve other people through this? And that alone will build the fortitude, because we'll start to get those answers, and we'll start to be empowered, and we'll start to see that we can transform other people, that we can create beautiful experiences even in the midst of our suffering, right? I remember, just to share a quick story, I remember a while ago, I was in an accident and I suffered a traumatic brain injury. So long story short, this transformed my life. I lost everything, and I couldn't work for like a year and a half. And I had a phone call with someone that had been booked months in advance, actually before my accident had happened. We got on the phone, and this woman said, "Hey, Joseph, like, I've heard so many good things about you. I'm super excited to chat. How are you?" And I said, "Well, to be honest, really crappy." And I just said, I had this accident and I've lost everything, and it's causing stress in my health. And, I don't know what to do. And I'm totally broken. And I just came from this place where I had won an award, right? I'd won this Thought Leader of the Year award, and I had shared the stage with other speakers. But all of the accolades and stuff that I was getting from other people, I felt like a total failure inside, because I couldn't actually work. And I was losing money, and my family, and all of this stuff was happening. And I just said, I just feel like a total utter failure and a big imposter, because all these people are putting me up on a pedestal when I think I should actually be, underground. And as I shared all this, I thought, okay, I'm being vulnerable, I'm being authentic. And then just silence. She had nothing to say. And then she said, "Joseph, thank you for sharing." She said, "Because I was just recently nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And since that happened, right, a lot of people have put me up on a pedestal. And I felt an awful lot the same. I felt like an imposter. And I haven't been able to share that with anyone until right now." And what was really interesting about this is that the day that this happened, this conversation was actually Gandhi's birthday. And so here I am, I've just won this award for the work that I do in teaching people the blueprint of how people started movements like Gandhi and Dr. King, who both won the Nobel Peace Prize. And the day that I'm whining and complaining about how crappy my life is because of this accident, I create a movement. I create a transformational experience for someone who was just nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And that was one of those moments where I was like, you know, like I knew that this accident that I thought was in the way of me doing what I wanted to do was actually part of the gift, was part of the process. So no matter where you are, shift and ask the question, like, how can I use this in service to other people? And miracles will happen. Doors will open up, and transformation will occur.
Wow. Excellent. Thank you. Next question. What is the key to evolution? How can we achieve the best version of ourselves?
Yeah. Well, first I want to preface this by saying I'm not an expert. I don't have all the answers. But what I have found to be most helpful is pausing, right? Taking the time to pause and then look out into the future vision, right? We all have moments where we feel aligned and we feel very clear, where we just know, right? Those moments where we're so connected and we know things, right? And in those moments, to look and ask the question, where do I want to be, right? Like, why am I here? What do I want to do with my life? And we get clarity about like where we're moving, and remembering that, so that when challenges happen and things come up, we can stop and we can ask the question, is this moving me closer to that, right? And to closer is not necessarily to a destination in terms of, do I have the house and the boat and the car and all the money and all of that? No, no, no. It's about getting clear that we don't change the world by what we do. We change the world by who we become. So getting very clear on who we are in the fullest expression of our potential, right? Are we honest? Are we kind? Are we loving? You know, are we authentic? Are we vulnerable? All of those things, getting clear on that. And so asking ourselves, you know, when we're in a moment, saying, is this helping me come to a more full expression of my best self? That will help us evolve, right? The other things will, you know, protect us. They will keep us safe. You know, they'll help us get things. But that isn't necessarily evolving. That's, you know, just kind of staying where we are. And obviously that staying where we are in the bigger picture actually helps us move forward. But that's, you know, that's another discussion for later. But really just asking that question, you know, is this helping me? And asking the question, am I willing, right? Am I willing to move into the expression of my full potential?
Beautiful. Thank you. Next question. How would you say we can serve others in our daily lives?
Yeah, I think that comes back to the earlier question of realizing that, you know, we can serve others in very simple ways, right? Sometimes just walking down the street and saying, I'm going to make eye contact with as many people as I can and smile. And sometimes, you know, we've heard the stories, but sometimes like a smile is all it takes to change someone's life. You know, maybe someone is, you know, considering doing something, you know, regrettable, or maybe someone is forgetting who they are. Maybe they don't see themselves, or they're hurt because someone else didn't see them. In that moment of seeing people, you know, we can transform lives. We can create a huge impact in moments. So that is the key, is remembering it's moments, right? We don't create an impact by becoming significant, right? It's not this process of saying, once I become rich and famous, then I'm going to start a charity, or then I'm going to use my voice and do something impactful. In fact, we create our significance through the impact that we create, right? We remember Mother Teresa and the work that she did because she focused on one person at a time, right? How do I be present? How do I love? How do I show kindness? How do I have compassion on people? And by doing that from moment to moment to moment to moment, she created something so significant that we all know her. So remember the moments and seek to show up and help people be seen, be heard, and know that they are loved.
Perfect. Next question. What do you think about collective consciousness? Do you think that we can help co-create a better world, or is it mostly an illusion?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that we can create a better world. But I think that the most important way that we can create a better world is by recognizing that the world doesn't need us to change it. What the world needs, if it needs anything at all, is just for us to change the way that we see the world. And when we start to see things differently, that change happens. But so often, and this ties back to what we were talking about earlier, like in this work, sometimes we get so busy doing things that we're trying to fix something out there, when the real work is the in-here work, right? On my website, I have a blog post that I get 20,000 visitors a month to the single blog post. And the blog post is about Gandhi, the quote that we often attribute to Gandhi of "be the change that you want to see in the world," right? And we often quote this. The truth is, Gandhi didn't actually ever say that. When you go back and you read what he originally wrote, you see how it could be paraphrased into "be the change that you want to see in the world." But what he actually said was something so much deeper, so much more significant and profound, that he was saying that we but mirror the world, right? Everything that we see out here is a reflection of what's going on in here. And that if we want to change the world, right, being the change we want to see in the world, it's not about being the example, right? It's not about, I'm going to lead by example and I'm going to recycle, therefore that's going to inspire everyone else. No. What he was saying is to change out there, the only way to do that is by changing within. And so when Gandhi was trying to do the work that he was doing, he always defaulted to, what is the change that I need to make? What is the meditation that I need to do? What is that inner transformation? How do I purify myself, right, to create that change? And so absolutely we can evolve collective consciousness. Yes, absolutely we can make the world a better place. But don't forget that if we focus our energy just on out there, often we can do that as a distraction, from deceiving ourselves that anything out there actually needs to be fixed. If the world needed to be different, it would be, right? The opportunity is for us to go within and see how do we evolve our expression, and you know what? It will mirror in the world.
Excellent. Next question. What can you advise to someone who is dealing with depression? What are other forms to serve or help them?
Yeah, I think there are two different potential ways to answer this question. One is like, is the person who is asking this question experiencing depression, or are they asking on behalf of someone who is experiencing depression? And again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving medical advice. But I would say this, that I know when I had my accident, my brain injury, I experienced a significant amount of depression. In opening up and talking about it, transformation happened. That in our culture, in our society, talking about depression is still often very taboo. That we're ashamed to talk about it, that we feel guilty to talk about it, we feel judged. And if someone is experiencing depression, to open up and to share openly and vulnerably, right? I think shifting that gear from why is this happening to me to why is this happening to me, right? And asking what good can come out of it. We'll see that there are opportunities to serve, there are opportunities to create change. And I would also say that so much of my personal experience of depression was that yes, there are biological factors, yes, there are neurochemical factors in all of that, and I don't want to diminish any of that. But also, I have yet to experience any bit of depression in myself or anyone that I've ever talked to that didn't also have an element of I'm feeling something that I don't want to talk about, or I don't want to feel something, right? And so I'm going to hide it away because I feel guilty or ashamed. And it's not until we put light on those things that are hidden that things can start to grow. And Again, it's not medical advice or anything, but I think that the most important thing that any one of us can do, if we're in that space of depression, right, is to start to ask that question: what can I feel that I haven't been allowing myself to feel, right? What is it that is so painful and frightening to talk about that I don't want to talk about? There's a gem there. And if you want to help someone who's experiencing depression, right, letting them know that you see them, that you love them, is super important. And creating a safe space that people will open up and start to share. Because ultimately, like, depression is about feeling alone, right? So how can we feel connected, right? Connected to each other, connected to ourselves, connected to our true nature. And that can't happen fully until we tell the truth. What can we tell the truth about in terms of what's going on inside?
Next question: why so many input from media, family, and friends? Or excuse me, with so much input from media, family, and friends, how do we identify if we are truly being authentic?
Yeah, I think it's very important to disconnect and to unplug, right? Especially in our digital world, right? To stop the input, right? Especially if you look at how the brain works, right? The brain is always processing incoming information, right? All this input. It isn't, though, until we turn off input that the brain can actually synthesize that information and create something new. So all of the most creative people throughout history have all had practices of creating space, right? Of turning off the input, right? So meditation, journaling, right? Time to sit in nature and reflect, time to be in a quiet room and just think are actually critical, right? So if we want to discover what's true and authentic for ourselves, we have to create space. We have to create that breathing room so that we can connect with ourselves, right? And again, seeing that, multiple truths can exist, right? What other people think and say is important, right? We can learn a lot about ourselves if we actually ask friends that we trust or family members to say, is there something I could do to be a better person, right? Like, we could get a lot of valuable feedback, and sometimes we're not ready for that. But at the same time, we also need to create that space for ourselves, to stop and say, I'm going to go within, right? And I think that for me, one of the most important breakthroughs in this was arriving at the realization that I didn't always need to have an opinion, right? That often things happen and we're so quick to have an opinion. We like that, we don't like that, or that's good, that's bad, or this or that. So first, arriving at a space where I didn't feel the need to have an opinion on everything was a very important thing for me becoming authentic, because I could then choose how I wanted to respond instead of a default, right? And as Viktor Frankl, and Stephen Covey talked about, in between stimulus and response, there is a gap, right? And so in order for us to be authentic, using the space in the gap of when something happens, let me stop and think about how I really feel about it, right? And then being true, right? Like telling the truth, being honest. If you want to be authentic, start telling the truth, especially about things that are difficult, things that frighten us, and have the courage. And just like anything, it's not about this or that, right? It's about seeing it as a muscle. How do we develop the muscle? Through practice, 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 practice. Repeat, right? Continue to do it. Start with small things, right? And start to build, right? Be authentic with what you want for dinner, right? And then slowly build from there in terms of being emotionally honest with the people that are closest to you.
Excellent. Well, that was the last question, Joseph.
Some great questions. Wow. It's
absolutely.
I love it.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you for so much time, so much wisdom, Joseph. Would you mind reminding again to Mindalia TV's audience, where can they find you?
Yeah, josephranseth.com, JosephRanseth.com, or anywhere on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Just Joseph Ranseth is my username. And thank you to everyone who asked those questions. That was really beautiful. I feel like just the energy and I can feel things bubbling just from those insightful questions. So please reach out to me and tell me who you were. I'd love to connect with you, and I'd love to hear kind of what evolves out of that. How things grow, and what your movement is, and how things are moving into a more full expression, because we're all in this together, right? And I just feel so seen. I feel so loved being connected here, and I'm grateful, obviously, to your whole audience, but also to connect with you, brother. What a gift! This is great.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's really been a blessing. Thank you very much for your time. And to our audience, again, this is Angel Rebo with Mindalia TV. Thank you very much for being with us today, and see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.